I sat in a small interrogation room, inhaling deeply the air filled with the smell of coffee and paper. The lamp above the table cast harsh shadows on the face of the detective, who was looking over his records across from me. I thought back to everything that had happened in the past few months and realized that this conversation would change my life forever. "Tell me everything from the beginning," Detective Green finally said, looking up. His eyes carefully followed my every move. "It started a few months ago," I began, recalling that first call. "I got a message from an old friend, Jack. He was asking for help. Jack didn't usually come to me with requests like that, so I decided to find out what happened. That evening was particularly dark. I drove up to Jack's house and saw that the windows were closed and the door was half open. My heart sank with a bad foreboding. I went inside and shouted his name, but there was no answer. Jack was lying on the living room floor," I continued, looking at the detective. "There was blood everywhere and I knew he was already dead. But this was no ordinary murder. Someone had written the word 'next' in his blood on the wall." Green leaned forward, listening with interest. "And what did you do then?" "I called the police," I replied. "But that moment was the beginning of a nightmare. In the following weeks, I started getting strange messages and calls. Someone was playing with me like I was a doll, and with each message it became clear that the killer would not stop at Jack. I became the next target. My heart was beating fast as I continued my story. When I found Jack, I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't just death, it was a message." "Letter?" Detective Green frowned. His eyes became even more alert. "Yes," I nodded, feeling cold beads of sweat run down my forehead. "I started getting messages on my phone. At first they were just cryptic words, but then they got more and more ominous." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and showed Green some messages. "Here, see for yourself. The first ones were short. 'I see you. You're next.' But then they became more personal. 'I know where you live. Your life is in my hands.'" Green looked at the message, his face becoming even more serious. It wasn't just scary, it was real and inevitable. "I started checking all the locks, always looking over my shoulder, constantly living in fear," I continued, feeling my throat tighten with emotion. "I tried to live a normal life, but every sound, every whisper in the dark made me tremble with fear. I knew that this killer was somewhere nearby, that he was watching me." "What happened next?" Green asked, not taking his eyes off me. "One day I came home and found the door open. I froze on the spot, but I gathered my strength and went inside. Every room was turned upside down. All my things were scattered, the furniture was broken, but the worst was in the bedroom. There on the wall were large in red letters it was written, 'You are mine.' That was the moment I realized I had to act." My voice trembled, and I felt my heartbeat even faster. "I packed all my things and moved to a motel on the other side of town, but even there I didn't feel safe. The killer was too close." Green looked at me with understanding. "And then you turned to us." "Yes," I nodded, taking deep breaths to try to calm myself down. But I didn't know that this was only the beginning of my horrors. Memories rushed through my head like a tornado, and I could barely contain myself to continue to tell. I felt myself sinking back into the fear and panic that had become my constant companions. Green watched me carefully, his gaze piercing but not judgmental. He wanted to know more, and I was willing to share. "Moving into a motel has given me no peace," I began, clenching my fists to keep myself from shaking. I felt that the killer was always nearby, that he was breathing down my back. One evening, I returned to the motel after a long day at work. Dusk had already fallen on the city, and the streets were empty. When I opened the door to my room, I was greeted by the same horrible feeling I had had in Jack's house. Everything was in its place, but it felt like someone was here. Every corner of the room seemed suspicious, and I slowly walked around the room, listening for every sound. I couldn't sleep. That night I kept hearing whispers and footsteps behind the wall. It seemed to me that the door was about to open and someone would enter the room, I continued, feeling goosebumps running through my skin from fear. Then I decided I needed to find the killer myself before he found me. "Did you try to find him?" Green asked in surprise. "Yes," I nodded, feeling bitter on my lips. I collected all the messages, all the threats, and started looking for clues. Each message was written in different fonts and from different phones, but they all had the same signature. M. That was the only clue. I decided that this could be the key to the solution, and began to check all possible connections. I remembered that Jack had once talked about an old acquaintance named Marcus, who had always been a bit strange. Marcus worked at the local library and was a real fan of mysteries and crime stories. I decided to visit him, I continued, remembering that day. Marcus received me with a smile, but I saw something disturbing in his eyes. We talked for several hours, but I could not shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Then I found an opportunity to go into his private office and saw something that froze me from horror. On the wall in his office hung newspaper clippings about all the murders in our city over the past few years, and the worst thing was that among them I saw a clipping with a photo of Jack and me. There was a picture of me and Jack, and it said "Next up." My voice shook and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I realized that Marcus was the killer. He was playing with us like cat and mouse, and now I was his new toy. I sat in front of Detective Green, feeling a wave of emotion wash over my body. Every detail, every moment of horror came back as if I were reliving those events. When I saw the pictures on Marcus' wall, everything inside me froze, I said, trying to steady my breathing. I felt the ground go away from under my feet. It was a real nightmare. "What did you do then?" Green asked, leaning in closer, his face serious and focused. I slowly moved away from the wall, trying not to give myself away. Marcus was in the next room and I heard him humming something. I ran a hand down my face, feeling a cold sweat. I was trying to think of a reason to leave quickly, but then he walked into the room and saw me in front of a wall of photos. His face changed in an instant, I continued, clenching my fists to hold back the shaking. His eyes were burning with anger, and he was approaching me step by step. I realized that I was trapped. Marcus stopped in front of me, his breathing heavy and ragged. He smiled, but it was the smile of a predator smelling prey. "You've learned too much, my friend," he said, his voice low and menacing. I realized I had to act fast, I continued, feeling the panic rising. I pushed him away and ran for the door. The exit was so close, but I felt like he could catch up with me at any moment. Marcus rushed after me, and I heard his footsteps behind me. Adrenaline pushed me forward, and I ran outside without looking back. I was running as fast as I could. My heart was beating like crazy. I knew if I stopped, it would be the end. I took refuge in the nearest cafe and called you, I finished, taking deep breaths and exhaling. But even then, I didn't feel safe. I felt that he was watching over me, that he was always somewhere nearby. Green listened intently, his gaze becoming even more serious. "Well, find him!" he said, steel in his voice. "But I need you to stay safe and help us collect all the evidence. This man is dangerous, and he won't stop." I nodded, feeling a wave of fear rising in my soul again. I knew that the struggle was just beginning and that it would be the most terrifying challenge of my life. My body was shaking, but I knew I had to continue the story. A feeling of hopelessness gripped me, as if I was facing that horror again. After talking to you, Detective, I went back to the motel, but now I was even more alert. Every sound in the dark, every rustle made me panic, I said, my hands still shaking. I locked myself in my room, checked all the locks 3 times, but even then I didn't feel safe. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his smile. I continued, feeling my throat tighten. From fear. He knew where I was. I could feel it. "And then what happened?" Green asked, his voice soft but demanding. "The next morning, I woke up to a knock on the door. It was the owner of the motel. He looked worried and asked me to come out. I asked what the matter was, but he just said, 'You have to see for yourself.' He led me to my car. There was a big red cross painted on the hood. My blood froze in my veins. It was another message from Marcus. He was playing with me, making me feel the fear of every moment. I realized I couldn't stay at the motel. I packed my things and decided to move in with a friend, Mike, who lived on the other side of town. I didn't want to drag him out, but I didn't see any other option, I said, feeling like the heart was beating faster. I called Mike and explained the situation. He agreed to help, and I immediately went to see him. When I arrived at Mike's place, he was already waiting for me. We talked for hours, and I felt relieved that I was not alone in this struggle. But even then, I knew Marcus wouldn't stop. Mike was a true friend. He helped me stay calm and think about our actions. But one night when we were sitting in the kitchen talking about a plan of action, the lights in the house suddenly went out, I said, feeling my voice shake with terror. We heard footsteps outside the window. Mike grabbed a kitchen knife and I reached for the phone to call the police, but there was no connection. We were in the dark, unable to communicate with the outside world. Every sound outside the window seemed closer and closer. We knew it was him. He came for us. Green listened intently, his eyes strained. What did you do then? We stayed in the house trying to defend ourselves. Mike was ready to fight, but I had a feeling this was just the beginning of a new horror. We knew Marcus wouldn't stop until he got his way, I finished, feeling my hands turn cold later. It was a battle for survival, and we found ourselves in the middle of this nightmare. Darkness enveloped us. Every sound echoed in a heart that was beating wildly. I looked at Mike, at his clutched knife, and felt fear flood me from head to toe. We were like two mice in a trap, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was somewhere nearby, hiding in the dark. We can't just sit here, Mike whispered, his voice shaking. We have to do something. I nodded, forcing myself to move. We slowly made our way to the door, trying not to make a sound. Step by step, breath held, we reached the corridor. Suddenly, the door exploded with a loud bang, and we jumped back. It seemed like Marcus was deliberately toying with us, making us feel completely helpless. I could feel the panic rising inside me, threatening to consume me whole. "He's here," Mike whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Then we heard his voice, hoarse, low, as if he were whispering directly into our ears. "I know you're here," Marcus said, each word like a blade cutting through the silence. "You will not hide from me." My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I could feel a cold sweat running down my back, and every nerve in my body was taut like a string. Mike waved the knife, gesturing for me to stay back. We began to move back, trying to find a way to escape, but Marcus continued to speak, his voice echoing from every corner of the house. "You think you can escape? You belong to me." Then the worst thing happened. The light flashed for a moment, and we saw his figure in the doorway. He was a tall, ominous figure, and his eyes glowed with an ominous gleam. I felt panic grip my mind. "Run!" shouted Mike, and we rushed forward, passing Marcus. We ran outside, but he was faster. He grabbed my shoulder, and I felt his cold fingers tighten around me. I struggled to break free, but Marcus was too strong. "You won't run away from me!" he hissed, his breath burning my skin. But then Mike, gathering all his strength, stabbed Marcus. He cried out in pain, and I took this opportunity to break out of his grip. We ran again, this time without stopping, without looking back. We ran to the nearest police station, our legs barely able to withstand the strain. Every step was painful, but we did not stop. We knew that if we stopped, it would be the end of us. When we finally reached safety, I felt tears streaming down my face. It was a horror I will never forget. We knew that this was only the beginning of our fight against Marcus, but now we had hope that we could stop him. "You made the right choice by coming here," Detective Green said when we told him exhausted everything. "We won't let that monster hurt you again." But I knew the fight was far from over. That terror, that fear that gripped me when I heard Marcus' voice was just the beginning. Now it was up to us to find him and stop him before he found us again. We were sitting in the police station, and every second that passed was an ordeal. I could feel my mind playing with reality, fear and tension flooding my thoughts. My hands were cold with fear, and I stared at Detective Green, hoping he would find a way to save us. "We have to be ready for anything," Green said, his voice calm but the worry in his eyes visible. "Marcus is not just a psychopath. He is very intelligent and dangerous." "We can't just sit here," I replied, trying to control myself. "He will find us if we don't act. We have to do something." "We're already doing everything we can," Green said. "But you need to stay safe. Stay here until we find out where he is." Mike and I agreed, although feelings of powerlessness and fear filled us. Every sound outside the window made us jump. Every knock was a possible signal from Marcus. My mind couldn't rest. It kept going back to every horrible moment over and over again. We sat in the station all night, I continued, my voice shaking and my eyes red from lack of sleep and tears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus' face, his terrifying smile. In the morning, when I was finally trying to sleep, we were woken up by a phone call. Green said they have new data. It turned out that Marcus apparently tried to attack another victim in another area, but the police managed to intervene in time. "We found him," Green said, his voice strained. "But he was able to escape. Now we have information about possible places where he may be hiding." "We must go after him," I said, feeling my heart pound again with fear and determination. "We can give him another opportunity to do damage." "You must stay here where it is safe," Green repeated, but I could see that his resolve was weakening. "We'll try to find him and stop him, but for now, stay safe." I could feel my fear turning to despair. If only I could do something to stop it. My mind was filled with thoughts of what might happen if Marcus came for us again. I could no longer bear this unknown. We were allowed to go back to Mike's apartment again, even though I knew it wouldn't make us safe. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see the figure of Marcus in the darkness. Every noise was like an alarm bell for me. That evening, we received another call from Green. He confirmed that new traces of Marcus had been found in the area, but he had fled again. Every new day, when I learned about new attacks and new victims, my fear and feeling of powerlessness only increased. "What do we do next?" Mike asked, his voice filled with anxiety. "How can we live in such fear?" I looked at him, trying to find words of comfort, but my own fear and anxiety made it impossible. I understood that we were trapped in a terrible nightmare, and I had no guarantee that we would be able to get out of it alive. Only one thing was clear: our struggle had just begun, and now we must find a way to defeat this unknown and deadly challenge. We spent the night in Mike's apartment, but the sleep was far from restful. Every sound, every rustle made me jump in fear, as if I were trapped and every movement expected Marcus to reappear. "I can't live like this anymore," I finally told Mike, waking up with sweaty hands and a heart beating so fast it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. "We have to do something. He won't stop until he finds us." Mike, sitting on the kitchen table and holding a cup of coffee, looked equally despondent. "I understand," he said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep and fear. "But what can we do? All the police are looking for him, but he runs away again and again." I knew it was true, but my anxiety kept me at bay. I knew I had to find a way to not only stay safe, but also help the police catch Marcus. Every moment of delay could cost another life. "Maybe we could try to find something we missed," I suggested. "Perhaps there are some clues that haven't been seen yet." Mike nodded, but his eyes were sad. "Maybe, but where do we start? Maybe if we go over all our records again and the facts we already have, maybe there's something we missed. At the same time, we can try to contact other witnesses if there are any," I suggested, trying to find even a small chance. We started working on it. We went through all the documents again and again, reviewed the testimony, trying to find at least one detail that could help. But after a few hours of work, I began to feel a sense of hopelessness fill me. We seemed to have hit a wall. Then suddenly, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Detective Green. "New evidence has surfaced. We need to talk." My heart was pounding. Mike and I quickly left for the station. Green greeted us with a small smile on his face, but his eyes were serious. "We found something," Green said. "We have new evidence that may help." "What it is?" I asked, feeling the tension rise again. "A person who lived nearby saw Marcus but could not recognize him. She noticed that he was wearing a strange medical suit," Green explained. "Perhaps this will help us narrow down our search." "A medical suit?" I repeated, trying to understand what it could mean. "Perhaps this is a sign that he has some kind of medical education or works in the medical field." "Maybe," Green confirmed. "We'll be checking out all the medical facilities in the area, but we need your help. Maybe you could remember something you saw or heard that might help." We returned to Mike's apartment, full of new hope, but also fear. After all that had happened, each new piece of information was like a light at the end of the tunnel, but I knew that even with the new evidence, Marcus was still very dangerous. Night came again and I tried to find sleep, but fear consumed me again. I could not sleep. My thoughts did not give rest. I found myself in the middle of a terrible game, and the only question left was whether we could find Marcus before he found us. From morning to night, we looked at all possible medical facilities, talked to the employees, and each time we received the same answers over and over again. No one saw anything suspicious. It seemed that our efforts were in vain, and I was beginning to lose hope. Every step, every disappointment added to my fear and sense of hopelessness. Mike and I were sitting in a cafe trying to take a break from the constant investigations. I tried to drink coffee, but the liquid was tasteless, and so was our situation. "We didn't find anything," Mike said, his voice shaking with fatigue. "It seems we're going nowhere." "Maybe we're just not seeing the whole picture," I replied, even though I could feel my mind beginning to lose clarity. Maybe we missed something important. At that moment, my phone vibrated again. It was a text from Green. Another message from a witness, something new. We quickly arrived at the station. Green greeted us with an even greater sense of urgency than before. "The witness we spoke to today provided new details," Green said. "He saw Marcus hiding in the basement of an old house that seemed abandoned." "Where is this house?" I asked, already beginning to feel my determination growing again. "This house is on the outskirts of town," Green explained. "We've already sent a group there, but we'd appreciate it if you could help." We set off again, my heart beating wildly. On the way to the old house, I could feel every second bringing us closer to a possible confrontation with Marcus. Every sound, every shadow was like a hint that we were close. When we finally got to the old house, it looked ominous. The gloomy building with cracked walls and broken windows seemed immersed in a silence that was like an echo of our fear. I could feel my hands shaking as we approached the door. "Mike, be careful," I whispered, my heart beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. "Marcus may be inside." Mike nodded and took the role of the first, knife drawn at the ready. We opened the door and broke the silence of the old house with all our might. The interior was dark and dusty, and every step we took sounded like thunder. We had gone through several rooms when suddenly we heard a noise. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. The sound was perfectly familiar, approaching footsteps. I looked at Mike and his face was pale with fear. "Marcus," I whispered, feeling the fear wash over me. "Is here!" We continued to move, but each step we took was slower and more careful. Suddenly I noticed how one of the dark corners of the house looked suspicious. We got closer and found an old hatch that led to the basement. Mike looked stubborn. "We should check," he said, and we descended the stairs into the darkness. Below, we found several racks of medical instruments and old documents, but more importantly, we found notes that appeared to belong to Marcus. They had details of his plans, an impressive number of casualty lists, and pictures of us. My fear peaked when I saw these records. It was like he was running our game and we were his pieces on the chessboard of death. "We can't stay here," I whispered. But at that moment, we heard a noise behind us. Marcus was close, and to feel his presence was like being punched in the stomach. "Let's run!" shouted Mike, and we rushed to the exit. But suddenly a sound is heard, as if something heavy has fallen. I could feel the fear filling me, and I was certain that this was the end of us. We ran out of the house and narrowly avoided the trap Marcus had set for us. Our hearts beat with terror, and even in the darkness of the night sky, I felt that I was once again under his gaze. We reached the police station, and I felt tears streaming down my face again. "He already knows about us," I said, trying to hold back my sobs. "We must act quickly before he makes his next move." Green looked at us with great alarm. "We'll work on it, but you need to stay under guard. Don't leave the house until we're sure he's in custody." We returned to the apartment filled with fear and anxiety. The night was unbearable again, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was closing in, ready to strike again. Every noise, every shadow was a reminder that we were once again at the center of his deadly game. The night passed like a terrible nightmare. My thoughts were plunged into darkness, and I could not find peace. Every sound outside the window, every creak of furniture in the neighboring apartments made me fear that Marcus was close. The morning came, but when it dawned, it could not bring me relief in any way. Every moment felt like an eternity, and I couldn't wait to finally find out what was going on. We found ourselves again at the police station, full of anxiety and fear. "We've checked every lead we can," Green said, but his voice wasn't as confident as usual. "Currently, we have information that Marcus often visits old abandoned places. He may be planning another attack." "Any new clues?" I asked, trying to suppress my anxious breathing. "We received reports of strange activity in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts," Green said. "Maybe this is our chance. We need to check this place out." Mike and I set off on a new trail, our hearts pounding with each step. We reached the old warehouse, which looked like a scene from a horror movie. Crumbling walls, broken windows, and darkness engulfing everything around. Every step was hard and tense, and my nerves were on edge. We stepped inside, and the darkness around us was like a living organism waiting for us to fall into its trap. We had only one flashlight, and its weak light had the strange effect of making the darkness more ominous. "Be careful," Mike whispered, his voice shaking. "We don't know what awaits us." "I know," I answered, trying to stay calm, "but we must go on." In the middle of the warehouse, we found several old racks on which various tools were laid out. In the darkness, it seemed that every object could be used as a weapon. Every sound that echoed was like a cry of danger. Suddenly, I noticed something that made my heart stop. On the wall was written in red marker a terrible message. "I know you are here." I felt sweat running down my forehead, and I struggled to catch my breath. Mike moved closer to the sign, his face turning pale. This is his message," Mike whispered. "He knows we're looking for him." "Maybe it's not just a threat," I said, trying to compose myself. "Maybe he wants us to find him." We continued our search, and suddenly we heard the sound of something heavy moving. My heart throbbed again with fear. We followed the sound and suddenly found ourselves in front of the door leading to the underground part of the warehouse. "We should check it out," I said, but my legs were shaking. This could be his hiding place. We opened the door, and in the darkness of the dungeon, we found many notes and photographs. These were images of us, Mike and I, taken from a very close distance. They were all amazed and showed moments of our everyday life. This is all about us," Mike whispered, his voice laced with terror. "He knows everything about us," I replied. "Maybe that's his plan. Maybe he's already decided what he's going to do next." We continued to check the room, but suddenly we heard the sound of someone approaching quickly. We turned to the door and saw it slowly open. "We have to go!" I shouted, and we ran for the exit again. My fear reached its limits, and I felt every part of my body shaking with terror. As we ran out of the warehouse back into the darkness of the night, I could feel my heart almost pounding out of my chest. We tried to calm down and return to the police station, telling Green about the findings. "He's not just a maniac," I said, trying to hold back tears. "He's a real monster. He's playing with us." Green looked at us with a serious expression. "We must stop him before it is too late. Our resources are growing, and we have received new information on his possible location." Mike and I felt that the climax of our terrible ordeal was approaching. Each new day brought new fears, and now we knew. Marcus was no longer just a danger. He was an invisible enemy playing with our lives, and we were just trying to stay alive. The night that followed was the most terrifying of all. The shadows around our shelter seemed alive, and every crack or noise was like a hint of approaching death. We sat in the police station waiting for further instructions, but the fear and anxiety were almost overwhelming. I kept thinking that Marcus was always one step ahead of us. Green finally called. "We have received new information." His voice was strained. "We seem to have the coordinates of where he might be. We have to act fast." Mike and I raced to the new location, each second seeming like an endless period of fear and anxiety. When we arrived, it was an old, rundown hospital that had long since lost any medical equipment. We knew this could be the last place we could meet Marcus. When we got inside, the darkness of the hospital was alive. Wandering through the corridors, we noticed fragments of old equipment and forgotten tools. Throughout our stay here, it felt like every step was bringing us closer to a terrible denouement. "We have to be very careful," Mike whispered, his voice a whisper of fear. We approached the door that led to the underground rooms of the hospital. With each step we took, my heart was beating faster, and I could feel my fear peaking. We opened the door and descended into the dark dungeon. "We can't stop," I said, trying to catch my breath. "We're almost there." The darkness was so thick that it seemed we could drown in it, but suddenly, I saw something that made my heart stop. The light of a flashlight coming through the crack in the door. It was proof that Marcus was already here. We went to the door and opened it, and a terrible picture opened before us. Marcus was standing in the middle of the room with his back to us. There were pictures hanging on the wall, showing us, our homes, and even our loved ones. "You were so close," Marcus' voice suddenly broke the silence. "But now you are in my trap." Mike tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. I was ready to fight, but I still felt my fear wash over me. Suddenly, Marcus turned and I saw his face. It was pale and misshapen, with eyes that seemed to burn with hatred. "You thought you could beat me?" he said, his voice filled with malice. "I'm playing with you and you can't escape." Mike and I were determined and we started to fight him. Every blow, every attempt to stop him was like fighting a living nightmare. I could feel my body getting tired and sore, but I couldn't stop. Marcus was incredibly strong and fast. We fought, but he was invincible. My fear peaked when I realized that we might not survive this battle. But suddenly I heard the sounds of reinforcement. It was the police. Green and his team finally arrived. "Stop!" shouted Green, and his team began to shoot in the direction of Marcus. It created a momentary distraction that gave us a chance. Mike and I managed to contact the police and Marcus was taken into custody. I watched him as they took him away. He looked as cold and ruthless as before, but he was finally in the hands of justice. "We did it," Mike said, his voice full of weariness and relief. "We stopped him." We went back to the station where all the police officers who supported us during this terrible time were there. I felt a great relief, but I was still under the impression of the fear and horror I had experienced. "You've been through a real nightmare," Green said. "But thanks to your efforts, we were able to stop Marcus. Now we can feel safe again." Mike and I returned home, but the fear and anxiety still lingered. The night was quiet, but for us it remained filled with memories of what happened. We found peace again, but the constant fear of what could happen at any moment remained with us. We now knew that true evil might be closer than we thought, and that our struggle for life would live on in our memories. It was the end of our terrible game, but the traces of fear and anxiety will remain with us forever.